Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you probably shouldn't get your hopes up about Democratic Party leadership being replaced anytime soon because, once again, elected Democrats are proving that they have no real interest in doing what the base wants. And this is true for Democrats in both the House and the Senate. But I want to talk about the Senate first, where Chuck Schumer is more vulnerable than he's ever been because he failed to stop 8 members of his caucus from caving to Republicans in the shutdown fight. And CNN's Manu Raju reports that his career is going to come to an end soon, regardless if he's ousted or not, because of his failure to lead. And he's going to explain why that's the case here.
Isaac and I spoke to roughly 24 Democrats from in Congress and in New York. And look, the overwhelming view among people we spoke with is that they believe his days are numbered one way or the other. And likely in 2028, when he's up for re-election again. Remember, at that point, he'll be roughly 78 years old, I believe, when he's running. So that's one reason why there's a belief that he won't run. But also how vulnerable he has become. If he were to run in a primary, he could potentially be defeated. So that's why a lot of people believe he's going to opt to retire. So that's one problem for him. The other is the dissension within the Senate Democratic caucus. He, of course, is the Democratic leader. There's going to be a secret ballot election that will occur after the November elections. Now, the Senate is a Democratic caucus that's a much less likely place where you'll see them try to remove someone as leader. That typically does not happen, but he is facing more grumbling about his leadership than he has in his 9 years as leader.
So he may be forced to retire in 2028, seeing as how he probably can't make it through a Democratic Party primary. And worse, there are questions about whether or not he'd even be able to survive a secret ballot vote on his leadership. But he's not just going to step down willingly, and his hope right now is that if he can get Democrats to take back the Senate, he can prove that he's still fit to lead. But that ship has sailed, because he's already proven again and again that he doesn't have the spine to stand up to Trump and the Republicans, and not to mention, he couldn't keep his caucus together if his life depended on it, which is the bare minimum for any party leader. And on top of that, it's theoretically not that difficult to oust him. Like, it could be done fairly easily, because as the American Prospect points out, all it takes is a single Senate Democrat to force a vote to sack Schumer thanks to Section 14 of the rules for the Democratic Conference. They explain what this means is that any member of the Senate Democratic caucus can bring a challenge to Schumer's continued leadership up for a vote. They would only need a majority of the caucus, or 24 of the 47 members, in order for the vote to succeed. If it passed, the motion would be self-executing, resulting in Schumer's removal at the same time that it's approved. And just like that, Schumer would be gone. In fact, there's a possibility that he would resign before that vote were held, since losing would be humiliating to him. And so, with things looking so bad for him, and with it being so easy to oust him, and momentum being against him with, progressive groups like Indivisible coming out against him and multiple House Democrats calling on him to resign, you would think that he's out the door already, right? The problem is it's not so simple. There's just one little hiccup with this plan to get rid of Schumer. And the problem is that not a single Senate Democrat has any interest in doing it, despite demands from the base, including Bernie Sanders, who fashions himself as a fighter of the establishment. But he doesn't want to do this. In fact, he dismissed calls for Schumer to resign outright.
Do you think he should be replaced?
By whom? Well, that's the point.
What do you mean that's the point? Figure it out, Bernie. The base is telling you what we want, and it's your job to execute our will. Nobody's expecting somebody amazing to replace Chuck Schumer, although it would be great if you stepped up to the plate. But, replacing him, even with anyone else, lets future Democratic leaders know that there will be consequences if they betray the base. But simply framing Schumer's failure as a betrayal, really, it's an understatement, because as a direct result of his failed leadership, our healthcare premiums are going to double, possibly triple. You know this, Bernie. Americans could lose their health insurance and die as a result of Chuck Schumer's capitulation. And if there's no punishment for that, there's never going to be punishment for anything ever. But the problem is that there isn't a single Senate Democrat who wants to be the one to do this. And to make matters worse, qualified senators that could replace Schumer, like Chris Van Hollen, have no interest in doing so. Axios reports that progressive groups like Indivisible are pushing Van Hollen to replace Schumer, but he's just not interested in the job, in part because he likely plans on running for president in 2028 instead. And you see, if you challenge leadership, that could jeopardize your relationship with other prominent Democrats and, more importantly, donors, and that could kneecap your potential presidential campaign. In other words, even though Schumer is as weak as he's ever been, and it's not that hard to oust him, he might be able to weather this storm after all, because Senate Democrats are either too cowardly or too self-interested to push him out. Thanks, Democrats. We know we can always count on you to disappoint us. Way to meet the moment. Now, to be fair to Bernie Sanders, he does seemingly want to replace Chuck Schumer, but he implies that they simply don't have the numbers yet to oust him.
I hope that by electing new members of the Senate, we will have, in fact, new leadership. But right now, it is what it is.
So basically, he wants new leadership, but he doesn't want to do anything to facilitate that change. He doesn't want to put in the effort to rally the base and get them to call their senators to pressure them to vote against Schumer in the event he forces a vote on his leadership. He wants to just, I guess, sit back and hope that the numbers eventually change in our favor. Well, to that I say, hope in one hand and shit in the other and see which one fills up faster, Bernie, because Schumer isn't just sitting around and hoping that things improve in his favor. He is actively wading into Senate races to elect allies that would insulate his power. So even though Bernie Sanders is great on policy, obviously he's proven again and again that he's just too nice and seemingly does not know how to play politics. Not to mention, his political instincts aren't great, to put it mildly. He wouldn't criticize Joe Biden during the 2020 Democratic Party primary, and that arguably cost him the election. He defended Biden after his disastrous debate against Donald Trump, even though everybody was calling on him to resign. Now, hindsight is 2020. Kamala didn't do much better, but it would have been even worse if Biden stayed in the race. Although recently, Bernie did finally criticize Joe Biden, but it was to give credit to Donald Trump. And I'm not making this up.
You don't have any borders, then you don't have a nation, right? In a sense. So has historically the United States done well under Democrats and Republicans in protecting the border? The answer is no. Trump did a better job. I don't like Trump, but we should have a secure border. And it ain't that hard to do. Biden didn't do it. Those before him did not do it. We should have a secure border, period.
Why is Bernie parroting GOP talking points on a right-wing podcast? Make it make sense, because it doesn't. And look, I'm not trying to pick on Bernie here, okay? But his weaknesses are emblematic of a broader problem with all elected Democrats. They're overly conciliatory. They're overly risk-averse to their own detriment. And it's starting to really manifest as a huge problem now that we need them to come through for us and get rid of leadership so that way we actually can be effective in this fight against Republicans. And even though Bernie Sanders is by far and away the best senator that we have, this just really demonstrates how good policy doesn't automatically translate into good politics. He might have the solutions to our problems, but he doesn't know how to play the game to get these solutions implemented. And that's not to say that he's not effective, right? I don't want to minimize his accomplishments. He's called the Amendment King for a reason, and he's doing what he can. But times are different now, and you need to kind of step up and ramp up the effort and the pressure. So, you kind of have to throw out the old playbook and take some chances once in a while. Maybe they pay off, maybe they backfire. Either way, you have to do more. And my point in bringing this up isn't to shit on Bernie relentlessly for no reason whatsoever. Rather, it's for all of us to learn from his deficiencies and vet new progressives accordingly, which means we need to support candidates who have good policies and are willing to fight tooth and nail, like 27-year-old Chi Ossé, a proud Democratic Socialist member of New York City Council, who made headlines this week after he filed paperwork to primary House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, saying the Democratic Party's leadership is not only failing to effectively fight back against Donald Trump, they have also failed to deliver a vision that we can all believe in. He adds, these failures are some of the many reasons why I am currently exploring a potential run for New York's 8th Congressional District. Now, his potential candidacy gives me a lot of hope because he is the exact kind of candidate that we need, who's good on policies and is also willing to fight. Now, being a fighter doesn't mean you're going to be effective, but what matters is you're willing to take risks, because that is needed in a moment like this. And he is somebody who's willing to take risks. I say this because he was one of the first people to endorse Zohran Mamdani, even when he was considered a long shot. Now, this is pretty big because you're a member of city council and everybody expects Andrew Cuomo to be the next mayor. And by endorsing his opponent, you could piss off somebody who's going to be the mayor. That could marginalize you. That could not allow your policies or your legislation to be brought up for votes. Like, he could fuck you over. But she decided to not make a political calculation and play it safe because, unlike so many Democrats, he seemingly has a spine and knows that the right decision isn't always the easiest decision. So if he's willing to do that, and he's willing to challenge the most powerful Democrat in the House, and make himself a sworn enemy of the establishment, that just tells me that this is the kind of person that we need right now in Congress at a time like this, where we're dealing with fascism. But here's the problem with his candidacy. It's not a guarantee yet. And there is a concerted effort to quash his insurgent primary challenge against Hakeem Jeffries before it even begins, not necessarily by centrists, but by fellow progressives. You heard that right. Andrew Solender of Axios reports Ocasio-Cortez told Axios during a brief interview at the U.S. Capitol that she was not aware that Ossé was challenging Jeffries. But, she added, I certainly don't think a primary challenge to the leader is a good idea right now. Ocasio-Cortez demurred on other races, declining to weigh in on whether she would support New York City Comptroller Brad Lander if he runs against Representative Dan Goldman. Jesus Christ, that's an easy one, AOC. But she's not alone, because they continue, Ocasio-Cortez is one of several high-profile progressives distancing themselves from Ossé's potential run, arguing that it is a distraction from New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani's victory. That doesn't even make sense. What are you talking about? Progressive Change Campaign Committee head Adam Green told Politico, it is not the right moment to launch a primary challenge against Hakeem Jeffries. Mamdani also appeared to discourage his fellow Democratic Socialist of America member on Monday. Quote, I believe that there are many ways right here in New York City to both deliver on an affordability agenda and take on the authoritarian administration in the White House, Mamdani told reporters of Ossé. Now, with regard to Mamdani, the New York Times adds, Mr. Mamdani also may want to avoid the optics of having Mr. Ossé challenge the House Democratic leader who endorsed Mr. Mamdani in October after months of negotiation. The disagreement caused Mr. Ossé to be disinvited from Mr. Mamdani's election night watch party, according to two people familiar with the matter, even though he has been a frequent presence at Mr. Mamdani's campaign events. Mr. Mamdani on Monday sidestepped questions about Mr. Ossé, saying he was solely focused on preparing for his inauguration and would keep his opinions just to the work of the transition. So, yeah. I'm going to go full fucking Joker mode, I swear to God. I'm losing my mind. I don't understand it. But before I go full Joker mode, let me just say that I want to talk through their rationalizations here, because I don't want to go out of my way to shit on allies, even ones that haven't been sworn in yet, if maybe they have good reasons for why they're doing this. But let me just say first and foremost that we don't need to hear from Adam Green of the PCCC. He is not a progressive, let alone some sort of progressive gatekeeper. This is a man who is arguably as hostile to democracy as insurrectionist Republicans. And I say this because back in 2020, during the primary, when his preferred candidate, Elizabeth Warren, was trailing Bernie Sanders, he actually argued on the Hill that the DNC should be able to steal the nomination away from Bernie Sanders if he only won with a plurality of pledged delegates. And he argued that it wouldn't necessarily be electoral theft, rather, it'd be akin to ranked choice voting. Except the only problem with that argument is that it's ranked choice voting exclusively by party elites to the detriment of voters who did not get to have ranked choice voting. It's an absurd argument, so nobody should take him seriously ever again after that. But as for AOC, look, I'll be fair to her and say I don't expect her to literally endorse the primary opponent of the next Democratic Party House Speaker, even though it's the right thing to do, because if she loses, it would put her at odds with the next speaker and potentially hinder her ability to be effective. And I understand that she wants to grow her power and she wants to be effective. She wants particular legislation brought up. She wants committee assignments. So I don't think anybody expects her to endorse against the House Speaker. I mean, it would be awesome. It'd be based to see that, but that's not realistic, right? But at a minimum, she should at least be expected to read the room and just not say anything at all. That's what I would do if I were in her position and decided against endorsing. If I were in her position, I would probably endorse against the speaker. But if I were in her position and, I didn't want to say anything, I would just stay on the sidelines. When you see that a majority of the Democratic Party's base wants new leadership, and that could happen organically without you saying anything, you just let it happen. But she's not doing that. Instead, she's poo-pooing the idea that Jeffries even needs to be challenged when she's in the position that she's in now because she herself chose to primary Democratic Party leadership. So it's odd that she'd instinctively oppose Chi's candidacy given her history as a Democratic leader slayer herself. It doesn't make any sense to me. I can't rationalize it. As for Mamdani, It's a little bit more difficult for me to rationalize his opposition to Chi's campaign. Maybe there's just like some beef between them that we don't know about. I mean, clearly there is, but maybe that's part of it. You can also argue that he'd prefer to keep a close ally in city council to help him pass his agenda. I think that's kind of the best, more charitable interpretation. But the worst, most cynical interpretation is that Mamdani wants to keep his powder dry and not ruffle any feathers within the National Democratic Party in the likely event he wants to run for higher office himself. And if he comes out swinging against Jeffries, that could jeopardize a future congressional run, because even though Mamdani would be a fundraising behemoth, Jeffries can also make the money printer go burr against him. But we don't know. Again, I'll say the same thing to him that I said to AOC. You don't have to weigh in. Nobody's expecting you to weigh in and put yourself in this awkward, uncomfortable position if you don't want to make political enemies. We can understand that. But why go out of your way and try to undermine his insurgent campaign? That, to me, is something that I find genuinely baffling. And unless Chi has some serious vulnerabilities, we're talking skeletons in the closet that can sink his campaign, that they know about, that none of us know about. I mean, I don't know why they would put their neck on the line to defend a party leader that doesn't give a shit about them. But even though, we're not privy to their thinking here, we can only speculate, it's still really discouraging, obviously. And it's why so many people have lost faith in the Democratic Party, because even the good ones seem to get defanged the second they obtain power, which really speaks to the rot within the institution itself. But when you step back and you look at all the efforts to take out both Democratic leaders, you can see how, once again, it's not going too well, because Democrats have become their own worst enemy. They could look like heroes right now to the base, but they've chosen to just pursue the path of least resistance, as they usually do. Senate Democrats are just too risk-averse and self-interested to take out Schumer, and House Democrats are too risk-averse and self-interested to take out Jeffries. At best, from time to time, you'll see House Democrats call on a change in leadership in the Senate, which is a chamber that they're not a part of, but nobody seems to want to do the work within the body that they're elected to represent to actually carry out the will of the base. The base, who is demanding new, more progressive leadership, might I add. They're all so out of touch. Even if you're right on policies, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be plugged in to what regular people want in terms of politics, in terms of maneuverability, in terms of leadership. Now, aside from them being out of touch, Democrats still don't really know what direction they want to head in, even though it's very clear, again, what the base wants. But I want to show you an example. So in a Politico piece about Gavin Newsom, they asked him whether he views himself as part of the progressive wing or the moderate wing of the party. And he answered saying neither, adding, "I want it to be the Manchin to Mamdani party. I want it to be inclusive." But these are two mutually exclusive ideologies. Manchin is a capitalist neoliberal who thinks public services should be commodities that produce profits for large multinational corporations, whereas Mamdani is a socialist that believes in decommodification of public services that should be guaranteed to the people. These are two conflicting worldviews, and you have to pick one or the other. You can't say we're going to do both of them, right? But they don't understand that you actually do have to limit the size of your tent and say we're either Mansions or Mamdanis, because if the tent is too big and you try to stand for everything, you end up standing for nothing. But the problem with Democrats is that they have no standards whatsoever, and they're willing to welcome anyone into the fold, including war criminals and literal fascists, so long as they're anti-Trump. And that is not hyperbole, my friends.
We are a big tent. We must be a huge, vast tent. I say this is a party that's got room for Marjorie Taylor Greene if she wants to come over.
Welcome to the resistance, Marjorie. Even though you were just promoting your legislation to ban healthcare for trans youth last week and condemned immigrants the week before that, we're a big tent here in the Democratic Party, so come on in and take a seat. You said the magic words, Trump bad, so you get to join our coalition now and water down our ideology even more. Listen, on a serious note, it's not wrong to form a coalition in Congress to challenge Donald Trump. This is what Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie have done with great effect when it comes to the Epstein files. But that doesn't mean you welcome them into the fucking party. And it's especially insulting for Raskin to say something like that, given how hostile party leadership has been to progressives and socialists like Chuck Schumer, who never endorsed Mamdani and wouldn't even say that he voted for Mamdani, the Democratic nominee. But yet, prominent Democrats like Jamie Raskin, who should know better, are opening the doors to far-right extremists in the party. And it's so absurd, and I don't understand why he thinks this is a good idea. I get that you want to be welcoming, you want to convert Trump voters into Democratic Party voters, but you can do that. You can court new voters without welcoming Marjorie Taylor Greene into the party. And it just really goes to show you that even the better Democrats, they're still woefully out of touch with the base. They'll listen to mainstream media and consultants, but I mean, God forbid they talk to regular people about what they want, right? And on that note, neoliberal abundance grifter Ezra Klein, who literally recommended Democrats run anti-abortion candidates to win red states, is starting to become a de facto power broker within the party, holding private talks with potential 2028 candidates, including Kamala Harris, Wes Moore, Gavin Newsom, Josh Shapiro, and others. So basically, they still think that they can defeat fascism by doubling down on neoliberalism, which is what ushered in the fascist era in the first place. Brilliant strategy, Corpo Dems. I'm sure it's going to work out better this time. But look, as bleak as things appear right now, I actually do want to leave you with a little bit of cautious optimism because there is some cause for hope. First and foremost, the base really is on our side for the first time ever. And the Democrats who ignore them and remain out of touch may get a brutal wake-up call in the near future. And I cannot wait to watch that. Second of all, even though neoliberals like Ezra Klein have a lot of influence over establishment Democratic figures, other more savvy Democrats, they're actually asking for off-the-record conversations with some of us in independent media. They're asking how we think they could become more effective at messaging, where we think the Democratic Party went wrong, what issues are the most salient to the base, and I'm not going to say who, but just know we have their attention now too, for the first time ever. And finally, we're seeing the rise of more Democrats who actually have spines. Socialist Katie Wilson was just elected mayor of Seattle. On top of that, progressive Cam Caskey just announced that he's running for Congress, and he immediately is hitting all the right notes that he should be hitting.
The richest people in our country are telling us that we can't afford real solutions like social housing and Medicare for all. No, we can only afford genocide, Palantir mass surveillance contracts, and ICE thugs. And we need leaders who aren't going to coddle their billionaire donors, who won't support a genocide, and who aren't going to settle for flaccid incrementalism.
That is the message right there. So, at the end of the day, even though we might not be able to get rid of out-of-touch leaders in the Democratic Party yet, I do think that everybody in the party, as out of touch as they may be, they sense that the writing is on the wall. But one thing to keep in mind is that, Democratic Party leaders are not just going to willingly cede power to the left or willingly resign. They're going to cling to power as long as they possibly can until we drag them out kicking and screaming. So in response to all of these roadblocks that we're seeing, I think that just means we need to double down on our efforts to oust party leadership. That means we call our senators again and ask them to oust Chuck Schumer. It also means if and when she launches his campaign, we've got to have his back. Support him against Jeffries. That's the right thing to do, and we don't have any institutional restraints holding us down. And the shutdown taught us that Democrats will always back down first in a game of chicken. And if Republicans can beat them at that game, we sure as shit can too.